Hi everybody, I'm Maddie and welcome back to Diaries of Farmhouse. It's been a while since we've done a beauty and botany video, so we're gonna jump into one. I've already filmed this a couple times, and it wasn't recording, or well, it recorded and then it said it couldn't capture it, blah blah blah. Anyway, if it doesn't capture this time, I'm giving up. Sorry, I love y'all, but it's not happening. I'm not doing it again. So, on that note, we are going to drink some coffee. I do have some wine here. I'll put information in the description below. Got a Moscato here. We're gonna get started again for the third time. It's alright. I didn't like the way the eye look was turning out in the last one, so it's alright. It's whatever. We are going to talk about African violets today. I am a fairly new African violet enthusiast, but now that I've gotten the hang of them, I really enjoy them, and I want you to be able to enjoy them too. So we are going to do a purple eye look inspired by this African violet right here. I'm going to do my best. The other eye look I did was looking kind of crazy, so that's alright. We are going to start over. So, I'm gonna try to, I've already said so much of the history that I think I'm just gonna give a brief one this time. And then if you want to learn more, I will put where I got my information down below. So, I feel like people are kind of afraid of African violets, but there is an African Violet Society that is just dedicated to the conservation of African violets, and like breeding them and selling them and showing them, which is pretty cool. So it's very interesting if you can go to one of their shows. I highly recommend it because it's very cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So they believe that African violets kind of started growing about 10,000 years ago, about the same time as other Streptocarpus. So we'll kind of talk about their scientific names in a little bit, but about 10,000 years ago, there were Streptocarpus, or ancient African violets, growing in high cold regions in the Ugalera, I'm not sure how to say it, mountains of Tanzania. They were first discovered kind of in the they were first kind of discovered in 1884. The materials were brought back to the Royal Gardens in New England by Sir John Kirk, but because of the poor quality of the samples, he was not recognized for this first kind of discovery of African violets. So 3 years later, a Reverend W.E. Taylor, he brought back African violet materials, but they were not able to describe or identify them. Oh, I'm going to put tape. Do I? Yeah, maybe. So then the next person in 1891, who the genus is named after, was, he has a very long name. I'm not going to say the whole name, but we're just going to call him Saint Paul for now. He gathered material from African violets and sent them back to his father in Germany. And his father then sent these materials to the kind of like the German gardens, or the German gardener of the Herrhausen gardens, and from there they gathered a lot of attention. Where they had them on exhibit there, people loved them. They are really beautiful, so I could see why. Don't laugh at me. Okay. They were kind of discovered. They were called the Usambara violet. Or about this time, the genus came about, which was called the St. Paulia genus. because of St. Paul and his father, who first discovered these violets, or well, were recognized for discovering the violets. So they first got this St. Paulia genus name in 1893 in Germany, and it was produced in several German magazines and commercial gardening magazines. And from there, they got their species name, which was Iantha, which is Latin for violet flower. So, pretty appropriate. Over the next 50 years, they had about 20 more species discovered. There's been a lot of DNA research around these plants, finding relatives, finding everything in the genus, and kind of categorizing them. So, excuse me. So African violets have very dainty, delicate-looking flowers, and they have these little hair fibers on their leaves, which a lot of the other relatives in their genus also have. So that is something that they continuously looked for. I am not going to go through all the names. As I go through, I'll kind of like maybe add them on the side so you guys can see. Later on, in 2006, based on DNA research, Ian Derbyshire in 2006 collapsed the genus to just 6 St. Paulia species. And from there, he also conserved 10 of the other former species and subspecies varieties. And then in 2009, they discovered 2 more new species in the Uluguru Mountains of Tanzania, and this was where we start to see the Streptocarpus. This was the Streptocarpus ulugurensis. They look like this. They call them an African primrose, so a little bit different leaf style, and they grow their flowers very tall, and they kind of open like a bell on the side. So we kind of get into Streptocarpus, and they noticed that some of these varieties were more trailing and creeping than they were. They didn't really grow like African violets. African violets grow at the base of trees and on the floor, kind of like in an outward shape, where some of these are starting to trail. Excuse me. According to the DNA research, African violets were closely related to Streptocarpus, and they also had similar characteristics as far as the hair fibers on their leaves, and kind of similar structure. At that point, the St. Paulia genus was replaced with Streptocarpus, and they were kind of smushed together, categorized together. Like I was saying, about 10,000 years ago is when they believe that Streptocarpus, or the earliest African violets, were starting to come about, and there was kind of 2 different groups of Streptocarpus or African violets at this time. There were some that were cold and high altitude Streptocarpus, and then there were also some tropical ones that were in like Madagascar. Both of these kind of appeared around the same time frame, which kind of ties into the earlier DNA research that they were similar in DNA and characteristics. So they believe that some of the African violets, or early African violets, Streptocarpus, that were in the mountains of Tanzania, kind of spread along that large mountain range and then kind of developed into the different African violets that we see today. Unfortunately, as common as they are for us to buy, they are starting to kind of disappear due to deforestation. So as deforestation happens, they are losing their protection from the sun, and they are also not able to have the moisture retained in the soil that they need to be able to grow. And because of the 150 different African violet species that are disappearing, the pollinators in that area are also disappearing. So that's kind of unfortunate. These African violet societies and groups are not only dedicated to breeding African violets and kind of studying them, but they are also dedicated to their conservation, which is really kind of cool. I will put all the sources in the description below so you can read them yourself and kind of learn more about it. Get into care. I'm going to try to finish this up before my phone decides to be a turd. So let me save this and then I'll be right back. Okay, so let's get into care because it seems like the thing that people struggle with the most. And I'm sorry if I'm looking this way. It's weird because I'm filming on my self camera, like my selfie camera. So I'm like looking at myself right here and I should be looking over there. So forgive me. Anyway. As far as care, so there's different kinds of pots that you can get for African violets. So they do say like you can get African violet pots like this. They like to be bottom watered because the leaves are very delicate. They have those little hair-like fibers. They're really delicate. You can see some like damage there. If the leaves get water on them, they can rot, they can mold, they can get diseases. It's just not a good thing. So they definitely like to be bottom watered. But they also have this they have like a large kind of tuberous root that comes down, and then they have really thin, small roots that kind of go out, and they're susceptible to root rot. So these pots kind of absorb the water as needed and keep the soil like evenly moist. I like to let my African violets dry out a little bit in between waterings. So where'd he go? So you can see this one, I let it dry out a little bit too much. But I like to let them dry out kind of to the touch before I fill their basins again. You don't have, oh gross, I just spilled water on myself. You do not have to have an African violet pot to have an African violet. A lot of them I will just put in nursery pots or in like terracotta pots. This is not an African violet, but that's kind of, I just wanted to show you. It's a cousin, but I will get like thrifty little containers that are glazed inside it that I can fill with water when it needs to be watered. This one's just sitting in there, and then when it dries out, I'll fill it from the bottom, let it absorb the water, but not sit in it. And then this one has a wick, so I just put a wick in the bottom of a terracotta pot. So in this one, like I just have it in like a container. You could literally put this in its own pot that you like, and then just take it out when it needs water, let it soak up in bottom water, and then put it back in the container. So those are some different ways that you can pot your African violets. They do like certain soils, so they like soils that are kind of like, they retain moisture, but they don't hold on to too much moisture and make them soggy. And they also like soils that put a lot more air around the roots so that they're not rotting. So you can find African violet mixtures online. I don't really suggest buying the African violet mixes that you see at like Lowe's, Walmart, Home Depot. I would suggest buying some online or mixing your own and looking up like the mixture recipe online. That's what my mom does. She's had really good luck with it. So, so that's what I would do. That's what I've done. I've kind of done that with my own that you buy in the store. Don't tend to necessarily allow enough air into the root system. So, but let's talk fertilizer. So when you fertilize your African violets, you want a balanced fertilizer, but you don't want something that's too strong that's going to burn those really fine roots. So you can usually find, African violet fertilizers in your general like plant stores. Sometimes you can find them in big box stores, or you can order them online. I'll try to link some down below or on my Instagram so that you guys can kind of find them a little bit easier. But you definitely want to be careful about which ones you use. I would suggest just finding like a pre-mixed African violet fertilizer that's for them, that's in the ratio that they need, and go with that. So that kind of covers like pots, what they should be planted in, how they should be fertilized, watered, all that. So let's go ahead and look at humidity. So they're growing in generally tropical regions in Kenya and Tanzania, which means that they are going to like a higher humidity. So mine have done pretty well with just household humidity. I have like small humidifiers, but I don't have anything crazy. The ones that I have in the trays behind me that I'll show you at the end are ones that I'm selling and that have been in my greenhouse. So they have a little bit higher humidity, and they are generally larger than some of the ones I have around my house, but you don't have to have humidity just for them. I would say they generally like a humidity at like 50 to 60%, which if you have like, well, I mean, if you have a swamp cooler or anything like that, you're generally going to be around probably 40 or 50% anyway. You can just kind of monitor whether or not the leaves are starting to brown and get crispy, if maybe it's not growing as fast, and then decide whether or not you want to put a humidifier near your African violet. But like I said, you don't necessarily have to. Like my mom and I have plenty of African violets that do just fine with a regular household humidity. It's just good to kind of know that they do come from humid environments, so they may grow faster and be a little bit healthier with the higher humidity content. I just want to add that if you're worried about humidity and you're trying to add humidity to your African violet, I do not suggest misting them or adding water to the point where it is sitting on the leaves, because like we talked about earlier, it can make the leaves rot, it can make the leaves damaged, and it can mold them, it can add bacteria. So if you decide to add humidity to the area in which you have your African violet, I would suggest adding a humidifier. I will link the ones that I have down below so that you guys can check it out. Let's talk light. When we're talking about light requirements for your African violet, they in the wild will grow under like a deep forest canopy. They live on the forest floor under the trees, at the bases of trees and such. So they're not going to want super, super bright light. They kind of get that light in between. So when you have them in your house, they kind of like... Okay, so I did a little bit more while I was doing whatever. But anyway, so the African violets, when you have them in your house, you kind of want them to have a bright indirect sunlight, or kind of like brighter indirect. You don't want them to have direct sunlight because it'll scorch the leaves. Some of my moms get like a west facing sun, so that kind of, and they're across from the window. And then I have some in my office like behind me where they're kind of getting just like a little bit of light from the east. And then I also have some in my greenhouse where they are under grow lights. So you just don't want them too close to the grow lights. You also don't want them in windows where they're going to get too hot or too cold. So just some things to keep in mind when placing your African violets. You get pests like any other plant on your African violets. There's a couple that they are more kind of susceptible to just because of the way they grow and the flowers, how delicate the flowers are. So I have noticed that African violets tend to get thrips on their blooms, and the blooms are really delicate and kind of intricate, so there's a lot of hiding places and there's a lot to eat. Thrips are kind of tricky, but I've never really noticed them on the leaves of African violets, just on the blooms. So if you notice that your blooms are kind of getting weird, like little spots on them, or not your leaves, your blooms, you might have thrips. And what I do to treat thrips is I will cut off all the blooms that are infected or that I notice might have thrips on them. And then I will treat the plant. So you can't really wipe the leaves. To clean them, you kind of have to just blow the debris off or kind of lightly wash them in like mild temperature water, room temperature water. But you don't want them to have the water sitting on the leaves. So when you have thrips, you can kind of just gently rinse the plant, and then take neem oil, or what am I doing with this hand? You can take neem oil or insecticidal soap and kind of alternate between the two and treating the plant over a couple weeks span to break the cycle. Thrips tend to lay their eggs in stems and in plant material, so continuing to treat the African violet in this way should get rid of any thrips problem that you have. They also tend to get, whoa, it's way too high. They also tend to get mealybugs because of the way their stems are and the way they grow. But you can kind of treat it the same way, and then you can take like rubbing alcohol and touch the mealybugs with the rubbing alcohol and it will kill them. So that's how I usually treat pests on my African violets. They will get gnats because you're keeping the soil pretty moist or wet, but you can, like I said, and I kind of recommend letting the soil dry out a little bit in between waterings, and that will kind of keep the gnats at bay. You can also get sticky traps, like those yellow sticky traps, excuse me, to catch the gnats and kill them. So, wow. These lashes are huge. Wow. My phone keeps cutting me off. Anyway, to propagate, cutting the leaves off, putting them in moss, and then transferring to soil in a baggie, and then transferring to outside the baggie is the best way. I made a video about that on my Instagram, so if you haven't seen that, you can go over there. You can grow them from seed, but they're super little. They're super hard to start. Out of the 2 packets of seeds that I had, this is the only one that lived out of all the seedlings. Cutting wise, I've had a lot more success. Like I have this little guy, and then I have this tray of African violets behind me that I started from cuttings. So I think that is the way to go when you're propagating them. So I think leaf cuttings are the best. I have a lot of African violets behind me in this tray that I have started, and they've done really well. I keep them under grow lights after propagating them in moss, transferring to soil, transferring them out of the baggie. Anyway, I think that's the best way. You can most definitely put them in a bright and direct window as well. Another great thing about African violets is they're generally pet friendly. They're beautiful. And overall, I would recommend them. If you follow these care tips, they're pretty easy. And yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the comment section down below. I'll put everything, all my resources and all of the things I've talked about today in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to follow me on my other social media accounts, it's Mad Plants on Instagram, and then diariesofafarmhouse.shop is my business page, and my business website is diariesofafarmhouse.com, where I sell earrings. These are my Valentine's earrings. I also have some more that I've put out. I have pots on there, dog bandanas, all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. Thank you for visiting with me today and tolerating my grumpiness from my phone shutting off all the time. Hopefully this turns out to be a good video. Thank you for stopping by and any of my new subscribers. I appreciate you all. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye. So these are violets that are for sale. The rest of these were cuttings that I started. I bought this one for myself. This was a cutting, not sure what it is. Got it at the African Violet Convention. So this was a seedling I started, transferred it to this. This was a seedling or a cutting, I can't remember. These are Streptocarpus leaves that I'm trying to start. They do propagate like African violets. I forgot to add that when they're root bound, that's when they bloom. So some of these have gotten root bound and they're getting ready to bloom. They're pretty full. So it's just kind of a waiting game. You might be able to get them to bloom by fertilizing, but you don't want to over fertilize because it can burn the roots. So I just wanted to add that in there.